Chapter 8 of Uller Uprising. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Acacia Wood. Uller Uprising by H. Beam Piper. Chapter 8. Authority of Governor General von Schlichten. There was fresh intelligence from Konkrook by the time he returned to the telecast station. Mutiny had broken out there among the laborers and native troops, who outnumbered the Terrans and their Kragan mercenaries on Gongonk Island by 5,000 to 500 and 1,500, respectively. The attempt to relieve Carrick's palace had been called off before the relief force could be sent. There was heavy and confused fighting all over the island, and most of the combat contragravity and about half the Kragan rifles had to be committed to defend the company farms across the channel on the mainland, south of the city. There had also been an urgent call for help from Colonel Rodolfo McKinnon in command of company troops at the Keegark Residency, and another from the Residency at Quirk, one of the free cities on the eastern shore of Takkad Sea. He called Keegark. A girl, apparently one of the civilian telecast technicians, answered. "We must have help, General von Schlichten," she told him. "The native troops, all but 200 Kragans, have mutinied. They have everything here except Company House, docks, airport, everything. We're trying to hold out, but there are thousands of them. Our Takkad native infantry, soldiers of King Orgzild's army, and townspeople. They all seem to have firearms." "What happened to Eric Blount and your resident agent, Mr. Lemoyne?" "We don't know. They were at the palace, talking to King Orgzild. We've tried to call the palace, but we can't get through. General, we must have help." A call came in a few minutes later from Krink, 500 miles to the northeast across the mountains. The resident agent there, one Francis Xavier Shapiro, reported rioting in the city and an attempted palace revolution against King Jonkvank, and that the residency was under attack. By way of variety, it was the army of King Jonkvank that had mutinied. The 6th North Uller Native Infantry and the 2 companies of Zerk Cavalry at Krink were still loyal, along with the Kragans. There was a pattern to all this. Von Schlichten stood staring at the big map on the wall, showing the Takkad Sea area at the equatorial zone, and the country north of it to the pole, the area of Uller occupied by the company. He was almost beginning to discern the underlying logic of the past half-hour's events when Kavini, the Skilk resident, blundered into him in a half-daze. "Sorry, General, didn't see you." His face was ashen, and his jowls sagged. Von Schlichten wondered if there could be another spectacle so woebegone as a back-slapping extrovert with the bottom knocked out of him. "My God, it's happening all over Uller! Not just here at Skilk, everywhere where we have a residency or a trading station. Why, it's the end of all of us!" "It's not quite that bad, Mr. Kavini." He looked at his watch. It was now nearly an hour since the native troops here at Skilk had mutinied. Insurrections like this usually succeeded or failed in the first hour. It was a little early to be certain, but he was beginning to suspect that this one hadn't succeeded. "If we all do our part, we'll come out of it all right," he told Kavini, more cheerfully than he felt, then turned to ask Brigadier General Mordkovitz how the fighting was going at the native troops barracks. "Not badly, General. Colonel Jarman's got some contragravity up and working. They blew out all 4 of the 10th NUNI's barracks. The 10th and the Zerks are trying to defend the cavalry barracks. Some of our Kragans managed to slip around behind the cavalry stables. They're leading out hipposaurs and sniping at the rear of the cavalry barracks. That'll give us some cavalry of our own. A lot of these Kragans are good riders. How about the repair shops and maintenance yard and lorry hangars? I don't want those geeks getting hold of that equipment and using it against us. Cormorant's outfit are trying to take back the lorry hangars. Jarman's got a couple of air jeeps and a combat car helping them." "Won't be one of us left by this time tomorrow," Kavini was wailing to Paula Quinton and another woman. "And the company is finished." "We'd better get him a drink, or a cup of coffee, General," Mordkovitz suggested, "with a knockout drop in it." Colonel Cheng Li, the intelligence officer, seemed to have somewhat the same idea. He approached Kavini and tried to quiet him. At the same time, a woman in black slacks and an orange sweater, the one whose pursuers had been overrun by the Kragans at the beginning of the fighting, approached von Schlichten. "General, King Kakkad's calling," she said. "He's on the screen in booth 4. "Right." To avoid any possibility of misunderstanding, he slipped his geek speaker into his mouth before entering the booth. Kakkad's face was looking out of the screen at him, with Phil Yamazaki, the telecast operator at Kakkad's town, standing behind him. "Von, The Kragan spoke almost as though in physical pain. "What can I do to help? I have 20,000 of my people here who are capable of bearing arms, all with firearms, but I have transport for only 500. Where shall I send them?" Von Schlichten thought quickly. Keegark was finished. The Residency stood in the middle of the city, surrounded by 200,000 of King Orgzild's troops and subjects. Since Ullerans were bisexual, the total population, less the senile, crippled, and very young, was the military potential. Sending Kankad's 500 warriors and his meager contragravity there would be the same as shoveling them into a furnace. The people at Keegark would have to be written off, like the 20 Kragans at Jaikark's palace. Send them to Konkrook, he decided. Thumazongwe's in command there. He'll need help to hold the company farms. Maybe he can find additional transport for you. I'll call him. "I'll send off what force I can at once," Kankad promised. "How does it go with you at Skilk?" "We're holding, so far," he replied. "Paula's with me here. She sends her friendship." Captain Inez Malavez, the woman officer in charge of the station, put her head into the booth. "General, immediate urgency message from Colonel O'Leary," she said. "Native laborers from the mine labor camp are pouring into the mine equipment park. Colonel O'Leary's used all his rockets and MG ammunition trying to stop them." "Call you back later," von Schlichten told Kankad. "I'll see what Thumazongwe can do about transport. Get what force you can started for Konkrook at once." He left the booth, removing his geek speaker. "Barney," he called. "General Mordkovitz. Who's the ranking officer in direct contact with the 18th Rifles? Major Falkenberg?" "That's right." "Tell him to get as many of his Kragans as he can spare down to the equipment park." He turned to Inez Malavez. "You call Jarman, tell him what O'Leary reported, and tell him to get cracking on it. Tell him not to let those geeks get any of that equipment onto contragravity. Knock it down as fast as they try to lift out with it. And tell him to see what he can do in the way of troop carriers or lorries, to get Falkenberg's rifles to the equipment park. How's business at the lorry hangars and maintenance yard?" "Cormorant's still working on that," the girl captain told him. "Nothing definite, yet." In one corner of the big room, somebody had thumbtacked a 10-foot square map of the company area to the floor. Paula Quinton and Mrs. Jules Cavini were on their knees beside it, pushing out handfuls of little pink and white pills that somebody had brought in 2 bottles from the dispensary across the road, each using a billiard bridge. The girl in the orange sweater had a handful of scribbled notes and was telling them where to push the pills. There were other objects on the map, too: pistol cartridges and cigarettes and foil-wrapped food concentrate wafers. Paula, seeing him, straightened. "The pink are ours, General," she said. "The white are the geeks." Von Schlichten suppressed a grin. That was the second time he'd heard her use that word, this evening. "The cigarettes are air jeeps, the cartridges are combat cars, and the wafers are lorries or troop carriers." "Not exactly regulation map markers, but I've seen stranger things used. Captain Malavez?" "Yes, sir?" The girl captain, rushing past, her hands full of teleprint sheets, stopped in mid-stride. "What we need," he told her, "is a big TV screen and a pickup mounted on some sort of a contragravity vehicle at about 2,000 to 5,000 feet directly overhead, to give us an image of the whole area. Can do?" "Can try, sir. We have an 8-foot circular screen that ought to do all right for 2,000 feet. I'll implement that at once." Going into a temporarily idle telecast booth, he called Konkrook. First he spoke to a civilian who chewed a dead cigar, and then he got Themistocles Mazongwe on the screen. "How is it now?" he asked. "Getting a little better," the Greco-African replied. "Half an hour ago, we were shooting geeks out the window. Now we have them contained between the spaceport and the native troops and labor barracks, and down the east side of the island to the farms. We have the wire around the farms on the island electrified, and we're using almost all our combat contragravity to keep the farms on the mainland clear." He hesitated for a moment. "Did you hear about Eric and Lemoyne?" Von Schlichten shook his head. "We just got a call from Adolfo McKinnon. He took a couple of prisoners and made them talk. The whole party that were at Orgzild's palace were massacred. Some of them were lucky enough to get killed fighting. The geeks took Eric and Hendrik alive, rolled them in a puddle of thermoconcentrate fuel, and set fire to them. When we can spare the contragravity, we're going to drop something on the Key Geek embassy over in town." "Well, that was what I wanted to call you about, contragravity." He told Mazongwe about King Kankad's offer. "His crowd ought to be coming in a couple of hours. What can you scrape up to send to Kankad's town to airlift Kragans in?" "Well, we have 350-foot gun cutters, one 90mm gun apiece, the Elmoran, the Gaucho, and the Bushranger. But they're not much at transports, and we need them here pretty